Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. I'm just waiting for a few people to come into the room. Give it a few minutes. For those of you just joining us, we'll get started in just a minute, just letting everyone into the room. All right, I think that's slowed down enough, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Forum webinar series. My name is Priya Chhaya. I'm the Associate Director of Content here at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. If you've come to Forum webinars before, you usually see me in the chat, but today I am your moderator. We are so excited to present this first of 4 webinars in a series we are calling Everything You Wanted to Know About Saving Places, but We're Afraid to Ask. We developed this specifically for our forum members, which is, if you're not familiar with it and you register for this webinar, the professional membership program of the National Trust. And we're so glad to see so many of you here today. Today's webinar focuses on social media, where my colleague Kelly Paris is the National Trust Manager of Social Media, will answer your questions about how you can make social media work for preservation. I'll let Kelly introduce herself in a second, but first I wanted to share a few technical logistics. A bunch of you submitted questions ahead of time, so we're going to start with those questions. But if you have any other questions during the presentation that you want to submit, feel free to send them using the Q&A function. That'll let us collect the questions in one place for even after the webinar in case we don't get to some of them, so we might be able to answer them after the fact. But you can also chat and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from in the chat as well. That is open and available for you to talk to each other. The closed captioning function is enabled for the webinar. You can use your own controls to enable and disable it. And then following the program, we will likely send out a recording. It might take about 24 hours for us to send it out to you. But if you're looking for any of the past webinars from Forum, they're available on our YouTube channel. Again, Colleen's going to drop this link. Colleen, who is managing the chat for me today, is going to drop the link in the chat, but we're going to ask everyone to be respectful to each other and to follow our code of conduct. So I'm just going to change the slide, which I forgot to do. Here's Kelly, and I'm going to turn this over to Kelly to introduce herself, and then we will get into questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Priya. Hi, everyone. As Priya said, my name is Kelly Paris. I'm the manager of social media for the National Trust. I have been in the social media space for well over a decade at this point, and have done work for various cultural organizations, museums, small businesses, embassies, nonprofits, so kind of the gamut. I've been with the National Trust for about 2.5 years, and I am very excited to be here, and thank you all for joining. We're starting out with this slide that is just a shameless plug. If you don't already follow us, you can do so on these various social media platforms. On Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, we are at Saving Places, and on Facebook and LinkedIn, we are at National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and then pull up our questions. So unlike our normal webinars, the intention behind this one is to just keep it open. That was the extent of our formal presentation. And we're just going to go through the questions that were submitted. So again, at any point in time, if you have an extra question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A panel and we will take an eye on it, keep an eye on that. All right, so the first question that we got ahead of time was, how do we leverage our limited time, resources, people power to devote to social media? Where should we focus our efforts?
That is the evergreen question, particularly for nonprofits and small institutions. I think the first step to really taking hold of your time and resources is to figure out who your target audience is, and then identify what platforms those folks are inhabiting. That way you can really focus in and be where those people are that you want to be in your audience. I think it's also important to kind of know what your content is like and what platforms are going to best highlight your content for you. There sometimes is a feeling in organizations that, there are so many social media platforms, so we need to be on all of them so that we can reach everybody. And that is an approach, true, but I don't think it is often the best approach. If you can focus in on one or a few platforms where you know that your audience is, you're going to be able to more sustainably post in those spaces and provide better quality than kind of spreading yourself out across every single social channel. From a content standpoint, in terms of time and resources, I think kind of the biggest hack is to know that content doesn't always have to be new. You can repurpose and repackage content that might already exist in your archive, whether that is something you've already posted on social media, or it's content that's in a report or on a blog post or a story that you've written. You can repackage that in new creative ways and visual ways, whether that's a carousel or a video or a GIF. You can make that content new and sort of reframe it for the various platforms that you're posting on. And an example of that with the National Trust is something that we have been focusing on over the last year, which is a series about tips and tricks. And these are, various topics in the preservation field or for historic homeowners specifically. This content was actually created in 2013, and then it was updated in 2017. And again, over this past year, we've gone back and refreshed the copy again to make sure that everything is accurate. And then we're repackaging it as sort of educational guides that are carousel posts for Instagram, so that they're highly shareable, highly savable, and just repackaging that content that has existed for us for a really long time. But using content that you already have is a great way to save time and resources.
Thanks, Kelly. I actually just dropped the category page for our tips and tools series. And you can see the most recent ones that we've refreshed are sort of up at the top of the list. And then as you see the ones that we haven't gotten to yet, but are working on, you'll see them further down the list. That's a great example. And I will just add really quick for Kelly's sake, another example is that she and I work really closely to look at our old content and talk through what might be worth resharing and what we can update besides the tips and tools as well. And so that's something else, is working creatively together with the person developing your content, if you have more than one person, to think about what makes the most sense for your work right now. So you began to touch on the second question, which how can we engage current social media users but also reach new users as a small nonprofit?
I think the best suggestion I can put forth is to give them something to do. I think sometimes as marketers, and particularly those at small institutions where you are wearing a lot of different hats and doing a lot of different roles, there is kind of this natural tendency to just disseminate information. You want to share all the work that you're doing and all the things that you're proud of, and rightfully so. But oftentimes that is just a megaphone at your audience. And so the user experience on the other end is not great when you fall into that pattern. So giving people something to do so that they can be involved, whether that is asking a question on your posts or providing them with a petition or an action to take, whether it's a poll or a quiz or prompting discussion, something where they can feel like they are contributing is really going to get them engaged. And a lot of platforms now actually have features built into them so that when you're creating posts, you can automatically add, a poll or a question or a quiz to them. So they make it pretty easy in that sense. The other component, though, on the engagement front is that social media is designed to be a two-way street. So while it's great for your audience to engage with you, you also have to remember to engage with your audience. So that means, liking posts, commenting on posts, sharing user content when it makes sense for you, responding to DMs and any questions that you get in a timely manner. And that engagement really builds upon itself over time. And personally, as a social media user, it is incredibly exciting when a brand or a company likes one of your posts or comments on your posts or shares your content. Like as a person, that is really exciting, particularly if it's a brand that you really respect and that you care about. So it is a very small thing from the brand's side, from the organization side, to like or comment on someone's post. But on the other end, on the receiving end of that, it can go a really long way in terms of building your relationship with those folks and really activating supporters from like a pretty low lift. The second part of the question was about reaching new audiences, I think. Kind of back to our first question. First step is to identify what that audience is that you want to reach and figure out, again, what platforms they're on, and try and drill down and be specific with that audience. You know, what do they like? What career path are they on? What platforms are they on? What other accounts do they follow? I think that's a really, again, low lift to reach new audiences, is meeting people where they are. So if there is an audience you want to reach and you know that they follow this particular account, you should also follow that account. And you can post in the comments so that your name keeps on popping up. And that lets those audience members know that you have shared interests and shared values, and it's going to be easier for you to cultivate that audience going forward. And then you can kind of go back to like very old school grassroots tactics and just ask your followers to share your content with their followers and build a network that way. If you have a piece of content that is particularly compelling or is a good resource, you can just ask your followers to share it. And if they do so, it kind of vouches for you to their audience and kind of naturally build out and get you in front of new audiences that way.
Great. So I'm going to pause for a minute and just remind everyone, because we've had about 10 people add since the beginning. If you are just joining us, the format is open Q&A. We are answering the questions that were pre-submitted with registration. But if you have questions that you don't think we're going to ask or you're not sure about, or you just want to ask another question, if you pre-submitted, please feel free to do that using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom panel. And if you have any questions, Colleen is on the chat to, if you have technical questions or things like that, Colleen is on the chat to help you with some of that. All right, so the next one we got was, which social platform should we pursue for which audience?
It is a very broad question, and it's going to depend on what your audiences are. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance and variation between platforms. But I'll kind of like run through the sort of 4 primary channels that the National Trust is active on and kind of talk about what audiences look like in those spaces. For LinkedIn, that is going to be more of a professional audience. So those folks are likely going to be more specific or more interested in kind of industry specific content, in job opportunities, in major announcements in staffing or organizational news, and generally just kind of the more technical or like niche content for your industry. Facebook, on the other hand, is the ever-present behemoth. It is still the largest social media platform on the planet. And the last stat that I could find from Pew, just because I was kind of nerding out about this question and was curious, is that over 70% of the US population is active on Facebook. So you're going to be able to reach a ton of different audiences on that platform. I will say, though, that the fastest growing demographic are those 65 and up. And in general, active users on Facebook tend to skew a little bit older than other social channels. So that is something to keep in mind when you're looking at audiences. For Instagram, their largest demographic is the age group 18 to 34. So that's a great place to connect with and engage with sort of young, early, mid-career folks. That platform also allows you to share content in a ton of different formats. So it's really dynamic, and it's a great way, again, to like repackage content in different ways to reach people in slightly different ways. And it tends to be a bit more laid back. So while LinkedIn is for your professional audience. That's a little bit more of a formal space. Instagram, it's got a little bit more of a laid back vibe. It also is a very positive space. So if you are looking to garner supporters and get your message out, Instagram is a place that tends to be really positive and supportive. And then we get to Twitter, which there's a lot to say about poor Twitter. But sort of in contrast to Instagram being very positive and supportive, Instagram, unfortunately, over the past couple of years, has kind of turned into a place that
Twitter,
is...
you mean? You said Instagram again.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I did mean Twitter. Yeah. Twitter has turned into a place that can be difficult to inhabit. A lot of the controls that were in place against hate speech and just etiquette in general have been lifted. So it can be, again, a difficult space for social media managers to navigate, but it is designed as sort of this high volume, fast paced sort of micro post environment. So if you have a lot of information coming out, it's great to share information quickly. You can share content multiple times very easily. And using hashtags on Twitter, you can really drill down to niche audiences that you want to connect with. So that is a really positive tool on the platform. But again, the environment has changed over the last year or so. So a lot of folks are looking for alternative platforms to Twitter at this point.
I'm gonna, because we're talking about that right now, and we also got a submitted question. I'm gonna pull up one of our later pre-submitted ones. Should we be on Threads, and what should we know about the platform before deciding? And someone actually asked sort of an addendum to that is, should we stay on Twitter or move to Threads? And I thought, is it an either or is it a stay until it dies, if it dies, or like that sort of question?
Yeah, that is a question that we are kicking around a lot. And I know that a lot of organizations are also sort of deciding that. So first, just in case there's anybody who is on the call who isn't aware of what Threads is, it is a new platform presented by Meta that essentially is an extension of your Instagram account, but the interface is nearly identical to Twitter. It again is sort of these micro posts, and it functions very similarly to Twitter at this point. In terms of should you stay or go, our thought right now at the National Trust is that we have a large following on Twitter. And luckily, while, again, I mentioned that Twitter is kind of like this negative space in a lot of ways, we're very fortunate that our audience is not that way. We, get occasional blips where there are, some tensions on the platform, but in general, day to day, our audience is really respectful of one another. So we are definitely holding our Twitter account and are still using it, but we have navigated to Threads. We are still kind of building out what our strategy is going to look like on that platform, which kind of goes into kind of should you be on Threads and what you should know about the platform. As an alternate to Twitter, it is great in the sense that so far it is, again, a very positive space. There aren't a lot of bots. There are no advertisements. When they created the platform, they did something really smart, which is if you have an Instagram account, when you create your Threads account, your handle automatically transfers over, and also your audience can automatically transfer over. It makes it very easy for people to follow you straight over to Threads. So when you navigate to Threads and you start your account, you're not starting from zero. You have a built-in audience already, which is a huge help and frankly removes a huge barrier to starting on a new platform where you feel like you are starting from square one. It is not the case with Threads. So that is a huge positive. There are some sort of, I don't want to say downfalls, but some issues with Threads that you should be aware of before you decide if you're going to, launch into that or not. At this point, it is not possible to delete your Threads account without deleting your Instagram account. If you decide you don't want to use Threads anymore, you can make your account private and you can hide all of the content that you might have posted there, but you can't actually delete the account at this point. There are some functionality limits with Threads. If you are a social media manager like me, they do not allow you to toggle between accounts. So when I need to switch between my personal account and the National Trust account, you have to sign in and out every time, which is a bit cumbersome. There are no third-party scheduling tools, and there's no desktop version to Threads. So every single post has to be done within the app. They don't have hashtags set up yet to categorize content. There is no analytics component either. So you can post content, but there is no easy way to kind of see the results of that content, which from a time investment standpoint for a business or an organization, that makes it a little tricky if you can't actually kind of like track what's happening there. Another sort of issue with it is that your feed is generated by the algorithm, and there's no way for you to select if you only want to see posts from accounts that you follow. That is not an option at this point. And then there are a number of accessibility issues as well. If you post a photo, the platform does not allow you to add alt text. If you post a video, there are no auto captions, and videos automatically play in the platform, and there's no way for you to switch it so that you have to manually play videos. So all that is to say, you'll have to decide for your organization whether it makes sense to try this new platform. I think that of all of the sort of Twitter alternatives that are out there, this probably has the most potential, just again, because you already have a built-in audience. But I think at bare minimum, you would want to secure the handle for your organization and put out at least one post kind of introducing yourself as a placeholder. And then you can decide going forward whether you're going to invest the time and resources into building that out as a new platform, depending on what your organization wants to do.
Great. That was a lot of really good information. And I will say, as someone who also automatically signed over the threads, I am still learning every day along with everybody else about what is going on. So that was, I hope that was helpful to everyone in the chat. So this is kind of a fun one, but what was your most successful post and who do you follow? So it's kind of two-parters and two different things. So.
Two-parters, yeah. So for most successful posts, I actually really loved this question because again, I got to like nerd out and go look at our analytics over the past, 2.5 years of my tenure. And I think it's also interesting because successful post is relative depending on how you define success. And it looks a little bit different for every platform as well, because the audiences are different on each platform. So for us, for the National Trust, we see a lot of excitement and engagement around a few sort of general like buckets of content or types of content. The first is anything architecture related does really well for us, whether that is posts about specific architectural styles or eras. It could be profiles of architects or information about kind of architectural trends over time. That always performs really well with our audience. The second is preservation success stories, and that can look like stories about properties that have been saved from demolition, or stories about underrepresented communities who have used preservation to safeguard their histories, or it could look like adaptive reuse stories. Kind of anything in that general sphere tends to be pretty successful for us. And then the other is timely posts about newsworthy or pop culture moments. The more timely we can be, we do see a response to that with our audience. So for Facebook, our highest, or I should say our post with the highest reach and engagement was a story from Preservation Magazine in our last issue. and it was about a modernist home in Oklahoma. So picking on the architecture front right off the bat. On Instagram, our most shared, most liked, most saved, most viewed, or most everything post on Instagram is one that we actually posted last month. And it was a carousel post featuring 7 Art Deco gems across the country. And it just outperformed anything that we've put out on the platform. So that was kind of fun to see. Our highest performing reel was from this April Fool's Day, and that was a riff on the classic Sarah McLachlan ads for the SPCA, but with a historic preservation lens. I'll segue just a little bit to say that that was a post that is one of the few examples during the year where we really get to play. A lot of our content demands a level of reverence that doesn't allow us to sort of play, right? So we look throughout the year for these areas where we can be a little bit more lighthearted and we can present something that's a little bit more fun and playful. And so April Fool's really was that for us. And it was nice to see that our audience really responded to that in a positive way. On LinkedIn, our highest performing post was a rebuttal to a piece that was published in The Atlantic this past January. So again, that was a timely response and also a very niche sort of topic that played well to that LinkedIn professional audience. On Twitter, the posts for us that typically garner the most reach and engagement, this is so in line with the platform that it's kind of like you couldn't script it better. They are posts that tend to have some form of conflict or controversy to them, which again, very much in line with the general vibe of Twitter. So whether that is the National Trust statement on Confederate monuments from 2020 or posts related to developments at one of our historic sites at Montpelier over the last year, those posts far exceeded anything else. And that is, again, just indicative of the tenor of the platform, that it is a place where people seem to want to come for a fight at all times. So again, that's why I say success. Yes, those are our highest performing posts, but whether they're the most successful is sort of how you interpret that. In terms of who the National Trust follows on social media, we follow a lot of preservation partners, the SHPOs, the TIPOs, other nonprofits, local preservation organizations, and preservationists. In particular, we follow a lot of grant recipients, corporate partners, influencers who we either have worked with or would like to work with. And then one of the things that I mentioned earlier was sort of following accounts that we know there might be overlap with potential audiences or current audiences. And so for us, that's following accounts, like Accidentally Wes Anderson and, Cheap Old Houses, places where we know that our audience inhabits, and we can be present in those spaces to show that we do have shared interests and shared values.
Awesome. Again, I'm going to take one from the Q&A because I think this is a good space for it. Robert Williams asked, I've heard a priority for any social media is to drive the viewer to the organization's webpage. Is that just for e-commerce or for nonprofit civic organizations too? I thought, considering our approach, that's a relevant question.
Yeah, so I think it sort of depends on the strategy of your organization and sort of the outcomes you're looking to achieve. For the National Trust, page views is one of our strategic goals for our digital marketing team. So we do, as much as possible, try and drive people to our website so that we can capitalize on that metric for web traffic. I will say there is sort of a growing trend in the social media space in general for zero-click content. And that is content that is just presented and you aren't directing people any which way with a link, right? You're just sharing whatever it is without a link. And there are varying reports on how successful that is, but a lot of organizations are starting to pepper zero-click content in as well. And we do that to some degree. But again, because our strategic goal is really to drive that web traffic, that is our priority, is to share links with our posts.
Yeah, and that's one way that Kelly and I work really close together, is as I develop the editorial and the content calendar, she and I talk sometimes about what might make more sense on what channel. Kelly's really good at taking the content that I produce and making it interesting and engaging on social, because that's her job. But it's also just, sometimes she'll get a text from me and be like, I just saw your post on that story. That's so great. I didn't even think to approach it that way. And that's always a moment of delight for me, because I spend so much time on these stories with the writers, and then seeing it out in the world and how people engage with Kelly's content about those pieces always makes me really happy. So thank you for that. Okay, the next pre-submitted question is, do you recommend posting Instagram stories over regular posts?
Yeah, for me, I think that I don't view that as an either or. I think it's more of like a both and that's because, again, going back to the potential like limited capacity and resources, I think it probably makes sense to post to your feed on Instagram, because that content is going to be there in perpetuity, right? It'll be on your feed forever unless you decide to delete it or archive it, versus a story that you put it up and it's going to be gone within 24 hours. So I think definitely a feed post, but it's incredibly easy to share that feed post to your stories and do both. It literally takes one click and you're done. So it isn't extra work for you, versus sort of designing like a standalone story that's going to disappear after 24 hours. I will say, though, that sometimes having a designed series of stories, if you are telling a specific narrative, or if you are driving people to a specific action or engagement piece, like that can be really successful, especially if you're going to save those stories into a story highlight. And then, yes, they'll disappear from your active stories in 24 hours, but that highlight will live on in perpetuity, again, until you decide to delete it. So if that's something that you're looking to do, I think that's a way to kind of use stories and make sure that the time investment in them gets the most for you, if you're going to save it in sort of a story highlight in that way.
Awesome. Let me check the submitted, see if anything is. Okay, yeah, just because the next question sort of switches tactics or direction a little. Olivia is asking, as a nonprofit organization that uses Instagram and Facebook, how often should we be posting content?
The answer is as often as you sustainably can maintain. I think it's going to vary depending on, how many folks you have involved in your social media and all the other things that you have going on. But I think it really is what you can handle. Social media algorithms typically reward consistency. And so again, having a cadence that is sustainable, that might be 2 posts a week on Instagram, and that's fine. Pick when you want to post on Instagram, do it twice a week. If you can do that going forward, that's great. If you can post 5 times a week on Instagram and you know that you can do it sustainably, that's great for you too. It really is going to depend on what your capacity is. The thing that you want to avoid is setting up a system for yourself where you say, oh, I'm going to post 5 times a week on Instagram, and you do it for a week and then realize that's not something that you can maintain. And then you don't post for 2 months. And then you come back and you say, all right, I'm going to post 5 days a week. And then you fall off again. Like, really pick something that you think you can manage over the long term.
Great. I'm going to do one more from the Q&A, and then we'll take this last one that was pre-submitted before coming back to the Q&A. We engage in a lot of preservation advocacy, and depending on the issue, there may be negative comments and trolling. How can we best deal with these types of comments? It's not a productive use of our time to do point counterpoint when we have so much on our plate. If there's misinformation, then we try to respond, but don't want to spend a lot of time dealing with trolls. And that's from Eugenia.
Eugenia, I'm sorry. Social media trolls are the worst. And when you are the person that has to deal with that, be on the front lines of that, it really is a difficult place to be. So I feel you. Our approach for negative comments is sort of evolving for each platform, but in general, if it is a true troll that is just out to stoke the fire, you can ignore them, you can block them. On some platforms, if it is really sort of outrageous or vulgar or hateful comments, feel free to delete that and block that user. We are not shy about deleting comments that are potentially damaging for the rest of the community, that is going to be potentially interacting with those comments. And I think that if somebody has a valid point, even if it is a negative comment, if they seem genuinely interested in having a conversation, you can move that conversation to a private space. You can, reply to whatever the comment is publicly and say, we'd love to continue this conversation with you, and start a thread sort of offline with that person. The one caveat to that tactic is to remember that even if you are in a private direct message environment, anything that you discuss there and you share there, people can take a screenshot of, and it can become public. So just if you move to a DM, never assume that it actually is going to be a private conversation. So continue to conduct yourself as though you are speaking in a public space. But again, if somebody is open to actually having a conversation, it is definitely worth the investment of time. I think also another important thing, if you don't have it set up for your organization on your social platforms, is to create some community guidelines. And those can be I think ours is maybe like 2 sentences. And it, essentially just says, you are in a space that we expect a certain level of courtesy and kindness. If you present yourself in a way that is disrespectful to other members of this community and this space, we reserve the right to delete and block you from that. So having that just in place for yourself, so that if anybody has any issues with how you decide to handle those negative comments, you have that to fall back on as well.
Great, thank you. That's all really, really good advice, Kelly. So switching directions for a second. The last pre-submitted question, which is also one that someone just submitted Q&A, everyone's on the same wavelength, which is great, is what are the best ways to use social media to reach fundraising goals? And the specific question from Terry is, what platform is good for raising? Because they've noticed that it used to be a lot easier to raise funds, but now they had some success in the past, but lately it's been harder to raise that kind of money today.
Yes, that is true. That is accurate. A correct observation. Going to kind of the first part about kind of how to use social media for fundraising goals in general, I think social media at this point is best used as a complement to other sort of digital avenues and digital platforms where you might be doing those fundraising efforts. So web and email primarily. Unfortunately, social media has kind of turned into a pay-for-play environment when it comes to running ads and doing fundraisers. So it can be kind of expensive when you get down to sort of a cost per lead or cost per donation on social platforms. That said, if you do have some money in your budget to kind of play around with, it's definitely worth trying just to see if the platforms work well for you. And you can also always try fundraising campaigns through organic posts. Those posts likely won't have the same reach as paid posts just because they don't have sort of that push behind them. But every community is different and every ask is different. So you might have success just asking organically to your followers. They might be receptive to that. You just won't know kind of until you try. And then the one thing I will mention sort of as like what platform might be best is if you are with a nonprofit organization, Meta does have a program that they call Facebook fundraisers. And that obviously is run through Facebook. But any nonprofit can apply for that. Sometimes the application process is a little cumbersome. The National Trust is actually in the middle of reauthorizing our account, and it has been over 6 months. So it can take a while, but once you're in the program, it's amazing because your followers can set up fundraisers on your behalf. So think, somebody is having a birthday and they share a post that is, for my birthday, donate to this fundraiser for the National Trust. For you as an organization, it's completely hands-off, and Facebook manages all of the collection of funds. They distribute it to you. So once you're in it, it is a great way to potentially gain some fundraising dollars. And you're also able to download reports from those campaigns. So you'll be able to add email addresses to whatever sort of fundraising list you might have, or directly send thank you messages to those folks who were part of those campaigns. So if you are a nonprofit, definitely look into the Facebook fundraisers.
Great. Okay, so that was all the pre-submitted questions. We have one more in the Q&A. And then Colleen and I have been talking in the back end about things that we think might be useful to this audience. But any advice for managing social media teams that are made up of regulatory/historic preservation staff who contribute to an institution's social media but are not formally trained in marketing and/or social media?
Wow. All right. So basically managing a team of folks who might have more experience on the technical side of preservation versus marketing.
I think that's what the answer is. Yeah, I think that's what the question.
Okay. I would say that probably whoever is kind of the point person for social media or marketing, I think just needs to figure out a way to work with those folks, again, who might have a lot of technical knowledge, but maybe what they present that they want to share on social media is not going to be digestible to a social media audience. I think every organization has various points of content that are kind of like that. So I think a good way to approach that is to build relationships with those folks on your team who have the technical expertise. And if there's something that they want to share out, approach a conversation with them as though you have never heard of what they're talking about before, and have them explain it to you as though they are explaining it to somebody who has zero experience. And that will help you kind of get to the core of what it is that they want to share and they want to talk about. And it'll hopefully help them kind of strip away some of the technical elements, so that you can kind of get to the center of what it is that they want to share, and be able to share it in a way that, a more general audience would be able to understand it.
Yeah, I was also thinking about, I really love the relationship building piece of that, and then also having them explain it to you, because that is so much the way you get clarity. I think about our work with our legal staff, where that stuff is very technical and nuanced, and getting it in what we call plain English sometimes is only possible if we get on the phone and we have a conversation about what exactly happened with a case. I would also say, Kelly, you and I have been working on this, is asking for information ahead of time. So if they know a project is happening, we have enough time to build out those explanatory pieces that might lead up to the actual thing that they want to talk about. So we've sort of given some education to the audience before that. So that's sort of one other thought I had while I was listening to you give your answer.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And then, so everyone, we do have about 15 more minutes. So if you have questions, feel free to submit them. But Colleen and I were talking about analytics and how, what tools you use, aside from the platforms that allow built-in analytics, what tool do you use to pull stats and data, so people can look at how things are working?
Yeah, so each of the platforms, aside from Threads at this point, again, does have at least basic analytics built into it. So if you aren't able to use like a third party sort of vendor for that or platform for that, you still can get analytics within the platform. The National Trust, we use Hootsuite for all of our content scheduling across social platforms, as well as a lot of the analytics. And that's really helpful because Hootsuite has a lot of functionality so that each post we schedule, we can put specific tags on it so that later when we want to go back and look at, oh, how did everything in, this content category perform? Everything is tagged properly. So we can really kind of sift through and drill down on those various elements. We also use a provider called Social Insider, and they do a really great job at tracking analytics for Instagram stories, which stories are a little bit harder for Hootsuite to handle. So we kind of pair the two. And then we do use Facebook's built-in analytics to pull for our monthly reporting.
Awesome. And then I guess this is our last question, unless someone submits something while we're answering this, is what do you do to stay up to date with new trends in social, particularly as we think about algorithms changing constantly and without any warning whatsoever, and all of a sudden your metrics have changed dramatically? Like, how do you stay engaged and stay up to date? Are there communities you're involved with? Blogs, well, not blogs, because blogs are sites that provide news articles about what is happening.
Blogs still exist. I love a blog.
For those of you, that's just a constant conversation we have as to whether people use the word blogs or if we're just using stories. So that's just a constant conversation I have with people.
I mean, as personally, as an old school blogger years and years ago, I'm never going to let it die. But yeah, there are a number of groups on Facebook and LinkedIn that I'm a part of that are groups specifically for social media managers. And those are groups that you basically just apply to, you submit that you want to be a part of them, and then you're pretty much automatically accepted into them. But there's always really great conversations about kind of what is happening in the industry. Instagram, if you follow the actual at Instagram on Instagram, they present a lot of information about updates to the platform. They also have a blog that is, or not, no, I just have blog on my mind. They have a podcast that is, I believe it comes out weekly, and it is little 5 to 10 minute vignettes about new features on the platform as well. So those are two ways that I keep up on Instagram. And then TechCrunch is sort of a tech-wide website, but I get their weekly newsletter and have it sort of set up so that it specifically focuses on social media content versus a lot of the other tech ecosystem. So that's always a source of information as well.
Great. Frank, to answer your question about do people not do blogs anymore, it's just the word has sort of gone through a transition where people now talk about content overall and storytelling, and it's just the word blogs, even though lots of people still use it. I've just noticed in the industry that some people have started to look at it as old school and passe and stuff like that. So you can still call it a blog. It is okay. That is essentially any storytelling you're doing on your website, and that's totally appropriate. Robert has a question for us that I have feelings about. Do you see a future for ChatGPT for writing copy? Should we become more familiar, practiced, and proficient with ChatGPT?
I have a lot of feelings about it too, Priya. So my mind is going in two different directions on this, right? I think that at this point, ChatGPT, it does a lot of really incredible things. Hands down, what it is able to do and produce is really remarkable, but it still, I don't think, is a replacement for human voice and human thought process in writing. And you can kind of get that if you play around ChatGPT and ask it to write something for you. It is all coherent in sentences. It all makes sense, but it lacks a little bit again, of that like human emotion and that human flair. So from that perspective, I don't see it as a wholesale replacement. I will say that, our digital marketing team, we have played with it for certain things. If we're stuck on the title of or the headline for a story, we'll run something through Chat GPT and see what it spits out in terms of ideas. So it can be used as kind of like an idea generator at this point versus like a wholesale replacement. I think if you are an incredibly small staff and you don't have resources, it also can probably be helpful in doing some more robust writing for you, as long as you then go back and edit it and really put in sort of your human touch to it, so that it's not all computer generated.
Yeah, and then I would also say from my side of the world, where I'm watching stories come out about digital content creators being replaced with just ChatGPT, and then companies realizing, oh wait, it really is not a replacement for the human, is fact check everything. It's the same thing schools are going through with students writing papers using ChatGPT. Is that it's pulling from the internet, it's pulling from stuff that's been out there for ages, and it might not always get it wrong. It might not always source it properly. And I think it's really important as people who are working in this space to remember that and to explain that to anyone who's like, oh, look at this fancy new thing. Let's immediately go and adopt it and use it. My favorite thing and a fun exercise to maybe try is I had a professor friend who mentioned another professor friend who basically assigned their students an assignment and said, write a paper yourself, and then go use ChatGPT to write it and then compare the two. And the results were really interesting to see like what was absolutely wrong and what was using their own human innovation in mind, what they found and what was factual. So it's again, like, it's an interesting tool that's out there, but just be aware of all the potential pitfalls that come with it. Thank you for a great question, by the way. So I don't see anything else coming in. We've got about 8 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is close us out. And if a question pops up while we're closing out, we can always like drop the screen and ask it at the end. But let me share the screen again. All right. Once more for the people in the back. These are
follow us. I would love to see you on social media if you don't already follow us. Before Priya closes out, I think that I am so lucky and grateful to have the role that I do as sort of the social media manager for the National Trust. I love that I get to be the hype woman for this organization, and I get to share all of the incredible work that our staff does and that our staff spends years and years pouring their time and effort into. I get to be sort of that final point to share it with people. So if you are similarly a social media manager, be very thankful for that role, that you get to be the person who puts it out in the world and gets to share the work of your organization. It is such a privilege, and I feel very fortunate to have it. And I would love to connect with you all. Follow us on all the places. Thanks.
Yeah. And then, there was a question and answer. And then we just wanted to remind you that this is the first of 4 different webinars that we are having in this series. I'm hoping Colleen is dropping the links in the chat. You can also email us at forumonline@savingplaces.org, and we'll send you the registration link directly. If you're looking for our webinars that are open to the public, which right now we don't have anything scheduled, we're building out the fall schedule right now. You can go to upcoming webinars, and that's also actually where you can find the descriptions for the next 3 sessions that are taking place, 1 in July and 2 in August. And yes, so let's drop this and see if I don't see any more questions. So I'm gonna make sure you guys have space to click on all those links for a second, but thank you so much for coming. I look forward to seeing to the next one. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing all your experience and wisdom, and have a great rest of your Tuesday and a good week.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.